All right, so we are doing part 2 of the graphing quadratic functions lesson. So to be successful at that, basically you need to be good at following steps. So the first step is to calculate the axis of symmetry and vertex. Your vertex you will put in the middle row of your table of values, and then you will plot that table of values onto a coordinate plane. You'll connect it to make a nice U-shaped parabola, and then in addition to that, we'll also identify the domain in there. So a lot of it we've done before. We've graphed exponential functions with a table of values in a really similar way, just now it's parabolas. So the lesson, if you missed it yesterday and want like that really in-depth explanation, you can take notes from yesterday's lesson. It's linked in there. I'm recording now and I'll link today's couple examples that we do in today's slides. So check that out. The practice, like my last class, had about 25 minutes to work on it. So I expect everyone to be able to finish it, because doing evens or odds brings it down to 4 problems. And I'm really serious about it being evens or odds. If you just do 1 through 4, then you're not going to get full credit. All right, I want you to do the ones that are harder too. So that's why I say evens or odds. If you do those and then you want to go back and do the other ones, that's fine with me. Love the extra practice, but definitely holding you to the evens or odds. We are doing the exit ticket in about the last 10 minutes of class. It's only 2 problems that you get to use your notes on. So I'm not really worried about it. But I have been catching people cheating on the exit ticket. So just know that if you're doing that, you will get caught eventually. So I have seen people like using their phones for whatever reason, even if you're on your phone during it. I'm just going to have you turn it in and it'll be a 0. And you can't retake that one. If it's you copying and pasting into another website, also an automatic 0, you can't retake it. All right, I do message home. I basically have a cheating email saved. It's usually the same one that I send home. And I just change the name and a few of the details. So that's always fun. Just don't do it. I mean, you get to use your notes on it. I don't see why you would need to cheat on an exit ticket. And it's usually pretty obvious because the kids that get perfect scores on every single exit ticket, but then get low scores on the topic test, I know to watch those kids during the topic test. Usually I do get suspicious, but I wait until I have like evidence or like I catch you in the act to send those emails home. So just know, like, don't do it. It's not worth it. Just learn it. It's a lot easier just to learn it than to put in all this effort into cheating. So any questions at all? All right, so we left off on number 6 yesterday. Let's start with number 7. All right, so the whole process is pretty much the same. You've already learned it. We're just going to kind of get warmed up. So even before the axis of symmetry step, so you can see there are steps on the front page that you can use to follow. But even before that step, it's a good idea to identify what? Your A, B, and C. Because if you identify those incorrectly, then really you waste a lot of time doing a lot of work and then it's just wrong. All right, so what would my A be in number 7? 2, what would B be? It would be 8. What would C be? 0. So that's a good step to just kind of add in the A, B, and C we get from whether or not they're in front of the x squared or the x, or they're just a single number. So since I have an x squared and an x, I know I have an A and a B. So questions about that part? All right, so then after that, we find the axis of symmetry using this formula. Write it every time, because a really common mistake is students forget that it's a negative B. So plug it in. Anytime you plug stuff in, what should you use? Parentheses. So I have a -8 over 2 times a, which you said is 2. And if you want to use decimals for that part, go ahead. Nothing wrong with that. Or you can simplify it by hand. What's -8 divided by 4? -2 is correct. But again, if you want to check it on decimals, that's what I would do on a test. So might as well. Questions about that? Do I need to have the x equals in my axis of symmetry? Yes. And you can even verify that with decimals. Like if you type in x equals -2, you get a line, where if you just type in -2, you get nothing. So that's why you need the x equals. All right, vertex is next. The x I should know immediately. What is it? Good, because we just solved for it. How do we calculate the y? Substitute the x value, which we said is -2, into that given equation. And even though like I recommend you use decimals, I want to see at least this part on your papers. I want to know that you get y from plugging in x. It'll help you remember it later on. And I want you to see what it should look like in your calculator. That way, less chances you'll make a mistake in your calculator. So you guys practice plugging it into your calculator. If you don't have your Chromebooks out now, you might as well get them out because you'll need them later anyway. And someone plug it in. All right, good. So I know some of you are still working on getting it out, but do practice plugging that in. If you get something other than -8, then let me know. I'll tell you what's wrong. All right, so questions on that part? All right, that is where the middle of our graph will be, is at that vertex. So what do we do with the vertex now? Put it in the middle row of our table. Because that will be the middle of our graph. We're going to want points to plot that come before it and after it. So on the number line, what numbers come before -2? What else? Good. So -4, -3, then -2. What comes after? -1 and 0. Good. So just like your traditional number line is what your x-axis is. How do you find your y's? How do we find it for the vertex? Good, you plug in your x's. So that should actually be pretty easy, especially if you're using decimals. So if you already had it from when you did the vertex, instead of typing it all over again, you can just copy and paste it and change the x's, the number that's in the parentheses. Do use your parentheses because that would change things if you don't. All right, so do practice. I know I'm showing you on the screen, so you can just copy those numbers, but do check to see that you get the same thing. All right, and now I have all the values for my table. In just like a matter of 10 seconds. I'm gonna eliminate the vertex because we already have that one. But these other ones I'll add to the table. Questions about that process? All right, so then what was x when, or sorry, what was y when x is -4? 0. What's y when x is -3? All right, we already had the vertex. What's y when x is -1? And what's y when x is 0? Good. So you make your table by plugging it in, and you can use Desmos for that. Now take like 30 seconds yourself and plot these points onto this coordinate plane. So practice doing that correctly. I'm going to freeze my screen so that you have to try it first, and then you can just see if you did it right. I'm not just with the house. All right, so when you're done plotting your points, you can look at the screen. That's what it should look like before you connect the dots. All right, connect your dots. It should make a nice U-shaped parabola. And I'm trying my best to connect the dots, but you know, probably looks better on your paper. All right, now last thing, we need to identify domain and range. We've done this before for parabolas, you just might not have realized they were parabolas. So the domain in this unit will always be what? So look at the x's. Where? Oh, sorry. I don't know why. Okay. Did you guys tell me -6 and I just wrote -2? Okay. Well, good catch. Let me fix this. All right, so then -4 is 0. -3, -6. -2, -8. -1, -6, and 0, 0. All right, sorry about that. I guess I just misheard and I forgot what our button does. All right, so then connect your dots. And now this is what it should look like. Last thing is just identifying the domain and range. So what would the domain be on this? All real numbers. That's what it'll be for both types of parabolas, whether they open upward or downward. Just memorize that. Now the range, is it all real numbers for the range? No, because it doesn't go infinitely up and down. So you'll always have at least one boundary. And what y value do you use for that boundary? -8. So you can find it two ways. You can kind of look where the graph just stops, where the very bottom of it is, and that y value is -8. Or you can just look at your table at your vertex, since that's always the highest or lowest point of your graph. You can just use that y value. And would you say that these y values are greater or less than -8? Greater. Do they touch -8? So greater than or equal to. All right, so if you want to memorize that these positive parabolas are always y greater than or equal to, you can do that. I personally just like comparing. So questions on this? All right, I'll save the U tries for when you work on your practice. Let's look at number 11, I believe it was. Because some of you might think this one's hard because it has a fraction in it. But it's the same process. You can still even use Desmos. So we're not going to do this whole thing. I think we'll just do as far as axis of symmetry. But what is my A of this one? What's my B? And what's my C? Good. So for the axis of symmetry, it's still negative B over 2A. So plug it in with your parentheses. I have a negative 6 over 2 times A, which this time it's a fraction. And if that intimidates you, well, use Desmos. You don't have to mess up on the calculations and risk messing up the rest of it. So you can enter this into Desmos. Just type it in with the parentheses and everything exactly how it looks on your paper. So negative 6 over 2 times 1/2. And you get that x equals 6. So easy. So your axis of symmetry would be x equals positive 6. Now you can also do it by hand. It's not that hard just because there's a fraction, but I can see how some of you like freeze up. What happens to the negative 6? Good. What's 2 times 1/2? What's 6 divided by 1? So same difference, but if you struggle with fractions, just use your calculator. That's as far as we'll go on this one. Now onto the back page. So these ones, they give you the graphs. And then they ask you things like axis of symmetry, vertex, and all that. Sometimes that's easier, but we haven't yet talked about, how to find axis of symmetry unless they give you an equation. So let's practice from a graph. What's the definition of axis of symmetry? Like, where would it be? Down the middle. So where's like the middle of my graph? What x value? At x equals -2. So we know axis of symmetry always is x equals. So wherever the middle of my graph is, that x value is my axis of symmetry. Make sense? All right, you guys do the same for graph B, just don't say it out loud. Try it on your paper first. All right, what'd you get for the axis of symmetry on graph B? Good. So it's a +3 because it's to the right of the origin on the x-axis. And the axis of symmetry is x equals whatever that value that is. So questions on that part? All right then, now the vertex of graph A. So vertex, is an xy coordinate. I don't have an equation to plug it into, but I do have the graph. So where is the vertex located on this picture? Or on any parabola? In the middle of it, in the turning point of it. So whatever xy value that is, that's my vertex. So what's the xy value of this one? So it should be -2 because of our axis of symmetry. What's the y value? -5. Good. And it's negative because we're going down on the y-axis. So vertex for graph A is -2, -5. Is it a maximum or a minimum in graph A? A minimum. It's your lowest point. So minimum for that. Questions? All right, do the same for graph B. Just don't say the answer out loud yet. Just write it on your paper. All right, what's the vertex of graph B? 3, 4 is correct. So to the right is my positive axis. Going up is my positive y's. So good. Identify where it would be in the middle. And is this one a maximum or a minimum? A maximum, because now it's the highest point on your negative parabolas. Good. Domain and range we'll skip just because we've already done lots of examples of those all year. Let's look at the equations to identify the equation based off the graph, but they are giving you some options. So you have two options you could do. You could type them all into Desmos and see which one has the correct vertex and axis of symmetry. Or you can look at your options. 2 of them you should be able to eliminate right away based on whether the graph opens upward or downward. So this graph A, is this a positive parabola or a negative one?
Positive.
Positive. So what does that mean about the equation? That what should be positive? The x squared, or the number in front of the x squared. So what options can I eliminate for graph A? Good. Because they have it where it would be a negative parabola, not positive. So then between these two, I could use Desmos, or I could test the axis of symmetry. Which one is the correct graph? It is not A. It is B. Right? Because remember, it's -b over 2a. So for graph B, it's -4 after plugging it in over 2 times 1. That's how we get to that -2 for our axis of symmetry, which we said earlier. Make sense? You guys do the same for number 8 on graph B. Don't say it out loud. I'll ask you in about 30 seconds. You should be able to eliminate 2 of them based on the opening of the graph. So if my graph opens downward, my x squared should be negative. So I can eliminate A and B right away. Between C and D, which one would give me the correct axis of symmetry? D is correct. All right, because our axis of symmetry we said is x equals 3. Plug it into your axis of symmetry formula. We'll plug in D. So I get -6 on top 2 times A, which is 2 times -1. -6 divided by -2 gives me +3. So that's why D is correct. Don't forget that -B in your equation. Flips the sign. So questions, concerns? All right, so then we're gonna do the exit ticket in the last 10 minutes. No one started early. All right, just work on your practice until about 9:09. Then I'll give you points for it during the exit ticket. So no one should get a 0 on it. I'll give you 20 minutes of class time to work on it.